So I don't want to belittle it. These guys have been fighting very hard for quite a considerable number of weeks now, and they have made some progress. But in all honesty, I just don't see it at the moment as being strategically significant.
Your thoughts first on the state of the conflict now. I'm seeing various reports that Ukraine has liberated the southeastern settlement of Robotyne. Now, can you tell us a bit about the significance of that and your assessment of progress that's made?
Yeah, sure. I think it's been an interesting couple of weeks, isn't it, with the air crash and all the rest of it. But the most important bit is this counteroffensive. And I would say it hasn't stalled, but it hasn't made anywhere near the progress that we would have collectively hoped. We're talking about a village here. One of the things I have to say I was struck with today when I was reading some stuff is A, the level of casualties, and B, it's sort of reminiscent really of World War One. Sounds a bit unfair, really, but the Somme offensive, where lots of people are dying for relatively short numbers of meters of ground being gained. This is not, people talk about this being a strategic village. Why do they do that? Well, because in theory, it opens up the road to Tomak, to the Azov Sea, to Crimea, and so on. But we must be honest about the fact that it is a village. It is only breaking through the first part of the Russian defensive, and there are three lines of defensive, rounds of defensive operations to break through yet. There's more minefields and trench systems and so on. So I don't want to belittle it. These guys have been fighting very hard for quite a considerable number of weeks now, and they have made some progress. But in all honesty, I just don't see it at the moment as being strategically significant.
Is the Ukrainian military's progress then, Tim, in your judgment, disappointing, or were expectations maybe set a bit too high at the beginning?
I think they were probably set too high at the beginning. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about this in terms of the previous battles they fought, the casualties they've taken, defending some, again, considered to be important cities, but perhaps not so much now. I think they have had, of course, Western support and Western armored vehicles, Challenger, Leopard, Bradley, Mastiff, and, quite a lot of other equipment. But in all honesty, these are relatively small numbers of vehicles and equipments. They have been able to arm a certain number of brigades. They've been waiting to throw their second echelon into the fight, and they've done a bit of that. But the truth is that Russia have held, and they have been bringing in reinforcements. They have got 18 and 25 division, I think now, undermanned, but nonetheless relatively well prepared. So I think our expectations were probably too high. And what's worrying is, of course, there aren't that many weeks left till the autumn hits. And you then have to wait till the weather turns either very cold, the frozen, and have a winter offensive, or we're talking about waiting till next year. And one of the key issues in this, which we've discussed a couple of times in the past, is the lack of air superiority over areas of the battlefield that they are trying to secure. And not even well, ideally you would want air supremacy. I was saying the other day to somebody that in the breakout battle from Normandy, Goodwood, it took the Allies, Brits and Canadians in particular, a long time to take Caen and break out of the Normandy. And we had massive air supremacy over that period. Ukrainians haven't got that. And that is a really difficult thing. It's very difficult to achieve success on the ground if you haven't got at least air superiority, if not preferably air supremacy.
I can't help wondering which commander, whether it's Putin, whether it's Zelensky, has most grounds for whatever measure of satisfaction, or is simply putting that question an example of looking for some tangible progress where it's still inconclusive, the pounding is still just so hard.
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit of the latter, to be honest. I mean, none of us are on Putin's side, clearly. And President Zelensky is doing a fantastic job. And as I've discussed again with you before, the whole moral component of fighting power bit, the will to win on the battlefield, is very powerfully with the Ukrainian side. But again, it has to be said, they've taken a lot of casualties. They're not recruiting as well as they would have liked. He was talking about an army of 1 million strong, a year or so ago. I hear various stories. One, it's difficult to know the truth of these things, but young men not wanting to sign up, young men leaving Ukraine because they don't want to be part of this. So you've got this strong resistance by the Russians on the one hand. You've got a very strong, powerful Ukrainian force doing their best to break through in this counteroffensive. But in the rest of the country, I mean, I heard the other day that house prices in Kiev have recovered back to their pre-war levels.
Really?
It's almost as though, we're talking about the World War I front line in France, whilst back in the UK, things were almost normal. It's very difficult to see. I don't think either side's got the advantage at the moment. I think it's too early to tell in terms of this counteroffensive.
Yeah, and you think too early for
but I don't think this is going to, as we've said many times, I don't think this is going to be sorted very quickly.
And you certainly can't justify any kind of complacency when you look at the state of what's going on the battlefield, but also the political situation more widely. I mean, all eyes on America, of course, Donald Trump and his legal travails, but equally there's an election coming, and Donald Trump or others in the Republican Party are not supportive of the Ukrainian military effort. That's going to be so decisive, and commanders and leaders on this side of the Atlantic, they must be watching that closely and with a certain amount of anxiety.
Absolutely right. I think we should be thinking about, I mean, there are various options here, and we don't want to be overly pessimistic, but, of all of the plans that you have in place, of all of the options that you have in place, you have to have at least two or three options. You have to have a plan A, plan B, plan C, and so forth. Of all the plans, in one of the military jargon phrases is the three plans we have in place, it's always the fourth that happens. Now, one of the things that can happen here is that there is this stalemate. It continues through the winter. The US elections, as you say, are key to this. There's not an awful lot of support within the Republican Party as a whole over this. I mean, I've been reading some pretty strong articles by people saying we should just stop, pouring resources into this Ukrainian campaign. The UK and are still very strong on this, but nonetheless, I think thinking about what happens if there's a stalemate absent the United States, that they begin to pull back from their support on this. And that's a pretty serious option to start thinking about. But now is the time. I'm not saying that this should be done publicly, but within the MOD and within the US DOD and elsewhere, these sort of conversations need to be going on. And I think even Joe Biden is not. I don't think he's going to put sufficient capacity into this fight to enable the Ukrainians to really succeed in pushing Russia out of the eastern provinces and particular Crimea. And I have to say, within America, I don't think an awful lot of people want him to succeed to that extent.